My name is Dr. Andrew Wade. For most of my life, I have existed in the shadows, working for the United States government on projects so deeply classified their very existence is denied at the highest levels. I was one of many military scientists whose knowledge and loyalty were used to maintain a certain equilibrium, a balance you were never meant to know about. Today, I am choosing to break my oath of silence. Not out of rebellion or a desire for sensationalism, but from a profound conviction that the truth, no matter how disruptive, must eventually be told. This is about what's hiding in plain sight, a story that didn't begin yesterday or even a century ago. This is about our neighbors, the ones we fail to recognize. Many of you have heard the theories about reptilians, beings of alleged non-human origin who secretly control our world, hiding their true forms behind human faces. For years, this has been dismissed as a fringe conspiracy theory, the stuff of ridicule and late-night radio shows. But the truth, as it so often is far more complex and stranger than any speculation. The reptilians exist. And they have been among us for a very long time, not as clandestine conquerors, but as partners. Participants in an accord, a treaty forged decades ago in the deep shadows of government bunkers and behind the closed doors of military bases. An agreement for integration. My story will begin where my own awareness did, with the events that forced me to re-examine everything I thought I knew about humanity and our place in the universe. My journey into this hidden world began in the late 1980s at Groom Lake, Nevada, the facility you know as Area 51. I was a young, ambitious xenobiologist recruited from MIT with promises of a project that would redefine the very parameters of national security. The secrecy was absolute. We lived and worked in a subterranean world, a labyrinth of labs and secure rooms where the sun was a distant memory. For the first year, my work was purely theoretical, analyzing alien biology from recovered, non-viable tissue samples. I believed I was studying the aftermath of random UFO crashes. Then came my elevation to Level 12 clearance. Colonel Sterling, my handler at the time, a man whose face seemed carved from granite, took me to a vault deep within the facility. It wasn't a lab, it was an archive. He handed me a thick, leather-bound briefing book stamped with a single ominous seal I had never seen before. The cover read, "The Roswell Memorandum, Eyes Only." "Everything you think you know about Roswell is a lie, Wade," Sterling said, his voice a low rumble. "Not the lie we told the public, but the lie the conspiracy theorists tell themselves. It wasn't a weather balloon, but it wasn't a crash either. It was a diplomatic arrival." The contents of that book changed my reality forever. The grainy black and white photographs were not of a crashed disk, but of a landed craft, scorched but intact. The most shocking images were of the meeting that took place in the New Mexico desert. President Truman, a handful of his most trusted generals, and the nation's top scientists standing face to face with two tall, slender beings. They were not little green men. They were reptilian, with large, intelligent eyes and an aura of ancient authority. The memorandum detailed the truth of their arrival. Their species, who called themselves the Namos, were refugees. Their star system was dying, consumed by a collapsing star, and Earth was their last desperate hope for survival. They had been observing us for centuries, recognizing our genetic compatibility. They didn't come with weapons of war, they came with a proposal. They offered us their technology, advancements in energy, medicine, and materials science that would leapfrog our civilization forward by centuries. They were responsible for the transistor, fiber optics, the very bedrock of our modern digital age. In exchange, they asked for one thing: sanctuary. A slow, carefully managed, multi-generational integration into our society. They possess the technology to alter their appearance, to wear human forms as flawlessly as we wear clothes. They didn't want to conquer us. They wanted to join us, to preserve their ancient lineage by weaving it into our own. The deal, codenamed the Chimera Accord, was struck in absolute secrecy. The rationale was clear, if terrifying. Revealing the truth in 1947 would have shattered our world. It would have triggered global panic, religious wars, and a complete collapse of social order. And so, the greatest secret in human history was born. The integration began. And my job, I was about to learn, was to help manage the biological and genetic aspects of this unprecedented secret symbiosis.
The Chimera Accord was a multifaceted operation, far beyond just hiding a few aliens in plain sight. The Nomos provided detailed genetic blueprints, allowing them to create human-appearing avatars, biological shells they could inhabit and control. These weren't just disguises, they were fully functional biological forms grown in specialized facilities and genetically tailored for compatibility with the human environment. My initial work involved studying the Nomo genome and comparing it to human DNA, looking for potential points of conflict or unforeseen biological issues. The similarities were startling, a testament to the Nomo's claim of ancient observation and perhaps even subtle manipulation of early human evolution. The key difference lay in a specific gene sequence that allowed for the unique biological processes required for their transformations and their extended lifespans. The integration process was meticulously planned, spanning generations. The first Nomo avatars were introduced slowly, carefully vetted, and placed in positions of minimal public exposure. Over time, as the technology refined and the human population grew more accustomed to the idea of extraterrestrial life through science fiction, the pace of integration increased. There were architects of this integration, human liaisons who worked directly with the Nomos, facilitating their entry into our society. These individuals were the gatekeepers of the secret, a clandestine network that spanned government agencies, scientific institutions, and even the entertainment industry. They ensured that the Nomos were placed strategically in positions where they could subtly guide human development in ways that benefited both species, preventing large-scale conflicts, fostering technological progress, with a Nomo inspiration subtly inserted, and preparing humanity for the eventual public revelation of their existence. Colonel Sterling became my mentor in this hidden world. He introduced me to some of these liaisons, men and women who moved with a quiet authority, their eyes holding a depth of knowledge that belied their human appearance. They spoke of the Nomos not as invaders or threats, but as a wise, ancient race with much to offer. They emphasized the fragility of their own civilization and their genuine hope for a future intertwined with humanity. My work expanded from pure research to active participation in the integration process. I became involved in the genetic monitoring of Nomo avatars, ensuring their continued biological stability and human-like appearance. I also began working on countermeasures, protocols to be enacted in the event of a premature or hostile revelation of the Nomo's presence. The stakes were higher than anyone on the surface of this world could possibly imagine. We were living a dual reality, a carefully constructed illusion where the extraordinary was hidden in the mundane, and the architects of this hidden history walked among us, unseen and unknown by the vast majority of humankind. One of the most profound revelations of my work was understanding the sheer scale and subtlety of the Nomos influence. It wasn't about control in the way conspiracy theorists imagine, shadowy figures pulling the strings of puppet politicians. It was far more elegant and insidious. The Chimera Accord was built on a principle of guidance, not governance. The nomos who integrated into our society were often placed in fields where they could act as catalysts for positive change. A Nomo avatar working as a material scientist might discover a revolutionary alloy. Another, as a sociologist, might publish influential papers that subtly steer public discourse away from self-destructive ideologies. They were the unseen architects of our better angels. Colonel Sterling once showed me a classified analysis from the Pentagon's internal think tank. It was a probability model projecting the likelihood of major global catastrophes. The graph showed a startling trend. Beginning in the early 1950s, shortly after the accord was signed, the probability of all-out nuclear war, catastrophic pandemics, and global environmental collapse began a steady, inexplicable decline from their predicted trajectories. The analysts call it the X factor, Sterling explained, pointing to the deviation on the screen. An unexplainable statistical anomaly that has consistently steered us away from the brink. They don't know that the X factor is a handful of Nomo advisors in Moscow, Beijing, and Washington, subtly influencing policy, de-escalating tensions, and promoting long-term thinking over short-term aggression. This was their primary role, to act as a stabilizing force, a counterbalance to humanity's most self-destructive impulses. They saw us as a brilliant but volatile species, capable of creating breathtaking art and music one moment and engineering our own extinction the next. Their survival was now inextricably linked to ours, so they had a vested interest in ensuring we didn't drive the car off the cliff. But this benevolent guidance came with a heavy moral cost. The secrecy was absolute. It meant allowing smaller tragedies to unfold to prevent larger ones. It meant standing by while humanity made mistakes, as long as those mistakes weren't existential. And it meant living a lie on a global scale. My work brought me into direct contact with some of these integrated nomos. In their human forms, they were indistinguishable from anyone you might meet on the street. But in the privacy of the secure labs, they would sometimes let the facade drop. You'd catch a fleeting, momentary flicker of their vertical pupils, or notice a stillness in their posture that was profoundly non-human. In conversation, they possessed a depth of perspective that was dizzying, speaking of historical events from centuries ago with the clarity of personal memory. They were the quiet guardians, the patient gardeners, and we were the chaotic, unpredictable garden they were desperately trying to cultivate.
The integration wasn't seamless. The nomos, despite their advanced technology and understanding of human biology, still struggled to fully grasp the nuances of human emotion and social interaction. Their logic was often purely rational, their decision-making process devoid of the messy, irrational impulses that drive so much of human behavior. This occasionally led to miscalculations. Situations where their attempt to guide humanity based on pure logic would backfire spectacularly due to a failure to anticipate the emotional responses of the human populace. The secrecy surrounding their existence meant they couldn't directly intervene to correct these missteps without revealing themselves. Furthermore, the human avatars, while biologically sound, were still grown, not born. This created a subtle disconnect, a lack of the ingrained cultural understanding and personal history that comes with a natural human life. They could learn our history, our customs, our languages, but there was always a layer of observation, of intellectual understanding rather than visceral experience. This became particularly evident in Nomo avatars placed in positions requiring empathy and emotional intelligence. While they could mimic the outward expressions of these emotions perfectly, there was sometimes a hollowness beneath the surface, a subtle lack of genuine feeling that could be unsettling to those who interacted with them closely for extended periods. There were also internal debates within the Nomo community regarding the ethics of their integration. Some believed it was a necessary act of survival, a benevolent intervention to guide a younger species towards a brighter future. Others felt a profound sense of loss, a severing of their own cultural identity as they immersed themselves in the human world. The human avatars, while providing a physical sanctuary, also created a form of cultural exile. The greatest challenge, however, came from within humanity itself. Despite the careful management of information and the subtle guiding hand of the Nomos, the inherent human capacity for suspicion and the enduring appeal of conspiracy theories remained a constant threat. Every unexplained phenomenon, every political scandal, every technological leap was fertile ground for speculation, and the specter of hidden manipulators lurking in the shadows was a persistent narrative. Our job at the clandestine levels of Project Chimera involved constantly monitoring these undercurrents of suspicion, identifying potential leaks of information, and subtly shaping the narrative to maintain the plausible deniability of the Accord. It was a delicate balancing act, a constant tightrope walk between revealing the truth too soon and allowing baseless paranoia to spiral out of control. The price of assimilation for both species was a constant vigilance and the heavy burden of an immense, world-altering secret. For decades, the Chimera Accord held, a fragile but persistent secret. But no secret, no matter how well guarded, is eternal. The first signs of a fracture came not from the outside world, but from within our own ranks. A new generation of leaders began to rise within the intelligence and military communities, men and women who had not been part of the initial, terrifying decision in 1947. They had not seen the Nomos as desperate refugees. They saw them only as a potential threat, a non-human element embedded within our society, an unacceptable risk to national sovereignty. This sentiment was championed by a man named General Marcus Thorne, a charismatic and ruthless figure in the Pentagon. Thorne believed the Accord was a foolish act of appeasement. He saw the Nomos' subtle guidance not as a benevolent act, but as a form of insidious, long-term infiltration. He argued that their technology had made us dependent, and their presence had compromised our species' very identity. He began to build a coalition of like-minded individuals, a faction operating within the deepest shadows of the government, dedicated to a single, terrifying goal: to expose and eradicate the Nomo presence on Earth. The first overt act came in the form of a glitch. A Nomo avatar working as a senior researcher at the CDC in Atlanta was a key figure in preventing the outbreak of a weaponized avian flu. During a critical phase of vaccine development, the secure network connecting his lab to our monitoring facility at Area 51 experienced a catastrophic failure. His biodampeners, the technology that maintained his human form, began to fluctuate. I was on duty, watching in horror as his life signs went erratic. On the encrypted video feed, I saw the panic in his eyes as he fought to maintain his composure. For a few terrifying seconds, his human features flickered, revealing the reptilian form beneath. It happened in an isolated lab, seen only by a handful of vetted personnel, but the message was clear. It wasn't a random failure, it was a targeted attack. Thorne's faction was testing their capabilities, demonstrating that they could forcibly out a Nomo at will. The incident was contained, officially logged as a severe epileptic seizure and the result of a faulty power surge. But for those of us on the inside, it was the first shot in a Cold War that had just turned hot. The architects of the Accord had always feared the chaos of public revelation, but now we faced a far more terrifying prospect, a civil war fought in the shadows, with the fate of two species hanging on the balance. The fracture was no longer just a possibility, it was a deep, bleeding wound in the heart of the world's greatest secret. The attack on the CDC researcher sent shockwaves through the Nomo community and the human liaisons who supported the Accord. Trust eroded. The delicate balance of integration was threatened by Thorne's aggressive tactics. The Nomos, who had for so long remained passive observers in their human guises, began to push back, albeit subtly. There were unexplained technical malfunctions in military systems aligned with Thorne's faction. Strategic leaks of disinformation designed to sow discord within his ranks, and a growing sense of unease among his followers. I found myself caught in the middle, my loyalties torn. I still believed in the original intent of the Accord, the idea of peaceful coexistence and the potential benefits of the Nomos' advanced knowledge. But I also understood the growing fear and distrust within humanity, fueled by Thorne's rhetoric and the inherent strangeness of the situation. Colonel Sterling, weary and disillusioned, confided in me. "We played a dangerous game, Andrew," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We thought we could control the narrative, that we could shepherd humanity towards acceptance. But fear is a powerful weapon, and Thorne knows how to wield it." Sterling revealed that Thorne was planning a major operation, a coordinated effort to simultaneously expose several high-profile Nomo avatars, creating mass panic and forcing a global confrontation. The intelligence was fragmented, but the intent was clear. Time was running out. I was faced with an impossible choice: remain silent, uphold my oath, and risk a catastrophic unraveling of the Accord, a potential war between two species, or break my silence, become a whistleblower, and expose the truth to the world, gambling that humanity could handle the revelation without descending into chaos. The Roswell Memorandum, the countless hours spent in sterile labs studying alien biology, the glimpses of a vast, ancient civilization seeking refuge, it all weighed heavily on me. The Nomos hadn't come to conquer, they had come seeking shelter, and we had made a promise. But could humanity, in its current state of division and fear, ever accept such a reality? Would the revelation lead to understanding or to widespread hysteria and violence? The potential consequences of either choice were terrifying. Yet inaction was no longer an option. Thorne's faction was escalating, and the carefully constructed veil of secrecy was about to be violently ripped away. Someone had to step forward to offer a different narrative, to explain the history, the purpose, and the potential future of the Chimera Accord before Thorne's version of the truth became the only one the world would hear. I made my decision. I would become the whistleblower. I would risk everything to tell the story that had been hidden for so long, to trust that humanity, faced with the undeniable truth, would choose understanding over fear. The first step was to gather irrefutable evidence, to compile a record that even the most hardened skeptic couldn't deny. My clandestine research over the years had given me a head start. Now I had to work quickly, before Thorne made his move and the world plunged into irreversible chaos. My decision made, I moved with a newfound urgency. My remaining access to Project Chimera's secure databases was limited and likely monitored. I had to be surgical in my extraction of information, focusing on the most irrefutable evidence that supported the existence and the peaceful intentions of the Nomos. I prioritized the original Roswell Memorandum, the genetic comparison studies, and the X-factor probability analyses. I also looked for any documented instances where NOMO intervention had demonstrably prevented large-scale disasters, ensuring these events were subtly flagged but not explicitly attributed to non-human influence. The network security protocols were formidable, but years of working within the system had given me an intimate understanding of its vulnerabilities. I used encrypted backchannels, steganography, and burner hardware to siphon data, leaving as few digital footprints as possible. Every download was a risk, every keystroke a potential trigger for alarms. The tension was a constant physical weight in the sterile confines of my lab. I also knew that digital evidence alone might not be enough. Thorne's faction would likely dismiss it as fabricated or manipulated. I needed something more tangible, something that couldn't be easily explained away. I remembered fragmented reports of physical artifacts recovered from the Roswell crash site, not just debris from the craft, but also personal items belonging to the NOMO emissaries. Most of these had been locked away in deep storage, deemed too sensitive for even Level 12 personnel to access. Using my knowledge of the facility's layout and security protocols, I navigated the labyrinthine corridors beneath Groom Lake, heading towards the oldest, most heavily guarded archive. The air grew colder the deeper I went, the silence more profound. The weight of decades of buried secrets seemed to press down on me. The vault was a marvel of Cold War-era security, a reinforced steel door with multiple locking mechanisms and biometric scanners. I had anticipated this challenge and had prepared accordingly, using a combination of technical bypasses and access codes gleaned from long-forgotten maintenance logs. Inside, the air was stale and smelt of aged paper and metal. Rows upon rows of labeled boxes lined the shelves. It took hours of painstaking searching, but finally, I found it. A lead-lined container marked Roswell Incident Artifact Collection. My heart pounded as I carefully opened it. Inside, nestled in protective padding, were several small, intricate devices made of an unknown, lightweight metal that felt strangely warm to the touch. There were also fragments of a crystalline material that seemed to subtly shift color as I moved it. But the most compelling item was a small personal data device, smooth and obsidian-like, covered in intricate, non-terrestrial glyphs. I had no way of knowing what information it contained, but I knew that its very existence would be undeniable proof of the NOMO's presence. I copied everything I could onto secure external drives. My time was running out. The increased network activity from my data extraction would not be noticed much longer. I had the evidence. Now, I had to get it out to the world.
My escape from Groom Lake was a carefully orchestrated dance on the razor's edge of detection. I utilized the facility's underground tunnel network, area supposedly decommissioned decades ago, to evade security patrols. My intimate knowledge of the base's infrastructure was now my greatest asset. Emerging into the stark Nevada desert under the cloak of darkness, I knew I couldn't stay in the immediate vicinity. Thorne's reach was long, and his resources were vast. I had a prearranged rendezvous point miles away, a remote cabin owned by a sympathetic contact, a former Project Chimera scientist who had long since gone underground, disillusioned with the secrecy and the growing internal conflict. The journey across the desolate landscape was arduous, but the weight of the data I carried propelled me forward. At the cabin, my contact, a grizzled man named Elias, had the necessary equipment, a satellite uplink and secure servers capable of handling the massive data dump. We worked tirelessly for hours, verifying the integrity of the files, preparing a concise and compelling narrative to accompany the evidence, and choosing the most effective channels for dissemination. We couldn't just dump everything online. It would be dismissed as a hoax. We needed to target credible journalists, independent researchers, and whistleblowing platforms with a proven track record. Our goal was a controlled leak, a series of carefully timed releases that would build momentum and force mainstream media to confront the undeniable truth. We included the Roswell Memorandum,
The genetic studies, the X-factor analysis, and high-resolution images of the alien artifacts. The Obsidian data device remained our trump card. Elias had contacts who might be able to analyze its contents, but that would take time. The moment of release was nerve-wracking. With trembling fingers, I initiated the data transfer, sending packets of classified information hurtling through the digital ether. There was no turning back. My life, and perhaps the fate of the Chimera Accord, was now hanging in the balance. Within hours, the first ripples began to appear. Strange documents started surfacing on obscure websites, dismissed initially as elaborate fakes. But then, more credible sources began to pick up fragments of the story, citing anonymous leaks and corroborating details. The internet, a tool both of control and of liberation, became our battleground. Thorne's faction reacted swiftly and brutally. The official narrative was one of a disgruntled former employee peddling dangerous misinformation. Denials flooded the airwaves, but the evidence was too compelling, too detailed to be easily dismissed. The seeds of doubt had been sown. The veil of secrecy, so carefully maintained for decades, had finally begun to tear. The aftermath of the leak was precisely the chaotic storm Colonel Sterling had always feared. Mainstream media outlets struggled either to debunk or cautiously report the deluge of leaked documents and images. Public opinion was sharply divided, ranging from outright dismissal to fervent belief and widespread panic. Conspiracy theory communities exploded with validation, while government officials issued increasingly vehement denials. General Thorne's faction went into overdrive, attempting to discredit me and suppress the information. I became a wanted man, a traitor in the eyes of the government I had served for so long. Elias and I were forced to go deeper underground, relying on a network of sympathetic individuals who believed in the truth. But the genie was out of the bottle. The sheer volume and consistency of the leaked data made it impossible to completely dismiss. Independent experts began to analyze the genetic studies, the metallurgical reports on the Roswell artifacts, and even the statistical anomalies in global catastrophe probability, corroborating key details. Slowly, tentatively, the truth began to seep into the public consciousness. More whistleblowers emerged, former Project Chimera personnel who could no longer bear the weight of the secret. They provided further corroboration, filling in the gaps in the narrative. The Nomo presence, once a carefully guarded secret, became a global controversy. Some demanded their immediate expulsion, fueled by fear and xenophobia. Others called for open communication and the potential benefits of their advanced knowledge. The world stood on a precipice, facing a reality it had never been prepared for. The Nomos themselves remained largely unseen throughout this turmoil. There were no mass public appearances, no grand pronouncements. Their integration, after all, had been a long-term strategy of quiet influence. But their subtle hand in guiding humanity, now partially revealed, sparked a global debate about trust, transparency, and the very nature of our shared history. My role in this unfolding drama was that of the catalyst. I had pulled back the curtain, exposing the hidden reality that had shaped our world for decades. The future remained uncertain, fraught with both peril and possibility. Would humanity embrace this new understanding, or would fear and division prevail? As I looked out at a world grappling with a truth it could no longer deny, I knew one thing for sure. The old reality was gone forever. The dawning of a new era had begun, an era where humanity was no longer alone, where the secrets of the past were finally coming to light, and where the future held possibilities beyond our wildest imagination. The integration had begun in secret. Now, the integration of understanding was the world's greatest challenge.